On a cold January morning, the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn became the unlikely stage for a clash of worlds. On one side, Venezuelan migrants gathered, celebrating the capture of Nicolas Maduro, a moment they'd only dreamed of. Their joy was raw and personal, marked by tears, laughter, and photos sent to loved ones back home as proof that justice had finally arrived. Each face told a story of loss and exile, but today, hope flickered. Across the street, a larger organized group assembled, chanting for Maduro's release and denouncing the U.S. as imperialist aggressors. Their signs and slogans echoed recent campus protests, their faces hidden behind masks and keffiyehs. The two groups stood divided not just by the street, but by lived experience versus ideology. The Venezuelan celebration turned to confusion and anger as they watched strangers defend the man who had destroyed their lives. The air thickened with tension, prayers for a free Venezuela clashing with chants for Maduro's freedom. In that moment, a Brooklyn street became a microcosm of a global struggle, victims of tyranny on one side, its distant apologists on the other. The world watched as reality and rhetoric collided, exposing the deep chasm between those who suffered and those who only imagined. For the Venezuelans outside the MDC, this was more than news. It was deliverance. Carlos, a young exile, live-streamed the scene for his family. "He's in there. Justice is finally coming for Venezuela." Elena, an older woman, wept quietly, remembering her son lost to Maduro's police. "For all we lost, this day is a blessing." The crowd shared arepas and coffee, strangers embracing as friends, united by pain and hope. They swapped stories of escape, dangerous journeys through jungles and borders, all to flee the man now behind bars. Every photo and video sent home was a spark of hope, proof that the dictator was mortal and accountable. Their gathering was an act of defiance they never dared in Venezuela. "Look, Mama, it's true. He's really here," one woman whispered into her phone. For millions, these images were the first sign that a different future might be possible. On that street corner, the dream of a free Venezuela felt real for the first time in years. Their relief was not vengeance, but the beginning of healing. The nightmare, at last, seemed to be ending. As the morning unfolded, the pro-Maduro protesters arrived with practiced precision. Their signs, "Free Maduro" and "End U.S. imperialism," blurred causes, linking Venezuela to distant conflicts. Many were young, masked, and familiar from other campus protests, their activism more performance than conviction. Their chants were loud, but their knowledge of Venezuela's suffering was absent. They spoke only of abstract anti-imperialism, never of hunger, repression, or the millions who fled. The real victims across the street were invisible to them, an inconvenient detail in their narrative. For these activists, Maduro was just another symbol in their endless protest against America. The suffering of actual Venezuelans was lost in the noise. The street became a stage, but the script was written far from the reality of those who had lived it. For the Venezuelans, the protesters' arrival was a bitter insult. Their celebration was invaded by people who seemed oblivious to their pain. "Who are these people?" Javier asked. "They defend the man who stole our future." Attempts to explain their reality were met with dismissive chants and accusations of being CIA puppets. Isabella tried to share her brother's story, killed by Maduro's death squads, only to be called a fascist. The disconnect was staggering. For the protesters, it was a game. For the Venezuelans, it was survival. "They talk about U.S. imperialism, but ignore Cuban and Russian control," an older man said. The protesters' rhetoric echoed the propaganda that justified years of abuse. Most painful was seeing people, free to protest, defend a tyrant who would jail them for doing the same in Venezuela. "It's more than ignorance," Carlos said. "It's a disgrace." The Venezuelans saw not allies, but enablers of their oppressor. Their lived reality was dismissed as inconvenient. The protesters' blindness was a fresh wound for those who had already lost so much. The gulf between the two groups was unbridgeable. To grasp the Venezuelans' relief, you must understand the darkness they escaped. Under Maduro, Venezuela's prosperity collapsed into hunger and chaos. Hyperinflation emptied shelves, Malnutrition and disease became rampant. Hospitals lacked even electricity. Parents watched children die from treatable illnesses. Dissent was crushed. Opposition jailed. Protests met with violence. Neighborhoods terrorized by armed gangs. Special police carried out thousands of extrajudicial killings. Over 7 million fled, walking across continents to survive. This exodus was a silent protest against a regime that destroyed a nation. Maduro's arrest was not just justice, it was a reckoning for a man-made catastrophe. Maduro's capture was the result of a years-old federal indictment for narco-trafficking, terrorism, and corruption. The charges detailed his role as leader of the Cartel of the Suns, turning Venezuela into a narco state. He allegedly conspired with FARC to flood the US with cocaine, using drug profits to crush opponents. The US offered a $15 million reward for his arrest, treating him as a criminal, not a political foe. For Venezuelans, the charges confirmed what they'd long known. Their country was run by a mafia. His presence in Brooklyn was the result of law, not imperialism. The celebration was for justice, proof that no one, not even a dictator, is above the law. The wheels of international justice had finally turned. The Brooklyn scene revealed a troubling disconnect. The pro-Maduro protesters, mostly privileged Americans, saw the world through academic theories, not lived hardship. To them, any U.S. opponent was a hero, no matter how brutal. Their slogans ignored the reality. Maduro surrendered Venezuela's sovereignty to foreign powers and criminal groups. Their activism was political tourism, a safe, self-righteous performance. The Venezuelans, by contrast, had paid the price of tyranny in hunger, fear, and exile. Their presence was not a hobby, but a fight for survival and justice. The clash was not between equals, but between lived suffering and detached ideology. It's easy to romanticize a dictator from a coffee shop. It's another to survive his rule. The true cost of freedom was lost on those who never had to fight for it. Amid the noise, one question mattered. Who truly spoke for Venezuela? Not the masked protesters, but the exiles holding their flag and weeping with relief. The real voice was in the mother mourning her son, the engineer forced to flee, the millions who left everything behind. Their exodus was a far louder statement than any protest chant. They left not because of sanctions, but because there was no food, medicine, or safety. The true voices are those who risked everything for freedom, not those who borrowed their struggle for a slogan. The small group outside the detention center were the real ambassadors of a wounded nation. Their quiet celebration was more powerful than all the manufactured outrage across the street. In their hope and pain, the true spirit of Venezuela endured. Maduro's capture is more than a legal event. It's a symbol of hope for millions. For the first time in years, Venezuelans believed the cycle of impunity might be broken. His removal could unravel the web of corruption and repression, opening a path for democracy. The message to those still loyal to Maduro: the regime is not invincible. For exiles, the dream of returning home feels closer. The celebration was about more than one man's fall. It was about a nation's possible rebirth. The hope: supermarkets full, hospitals working, children playing without fear. The path ahead is hard. Rebuilding will take time and unity. But for the first time, optimism feels real. Maduro's arrest doesn't solve everything, but it removes the greatest obstacle. On a cold Brooklyn day, Venezuelans celebrated not the end, but the beginning of a new fight for a free Venezuela. The future, at last, seemed possible.